The first time I caught my reflection that morning, I almost didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. My hair fell in soft waves, pinned with pearls that shimmered like drops of water. The gown embraced me like it had been sewn onto my body, lace trailing in a delicate river behind me. I lifted the hem slightly and turned, watching it ripple across the floor. For a moment, it was as though I had stepped out of myself and into a fairy tale. The hotel suite where I dressed buzzed with hushed voices and clinking glasses, bridesmaids fluttering about like sparrows. My mother dabbed at her eyes, whispering, "You look like a queen, Izzy." I smiled, though inside my chest ached with a secret so precious it felt like a jewel hidden in my pocket. The tiny life growing inside me was still mine alone, my gift to Chris that I had planned for months. I pictured his face when I finally told him, perhaps during our first dance, perhaps later that night when the music dimmed. Either way, I would reveal to him that we were not just starting a marriage, we were starting a family. The limousine glided through Boston streets, polished black steel reflecting the glow of street lamps. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, the clang of a trolley bell, the footsteps of tourists spilling from Quincy Market, the faint salt in the air from the harbor. But behind the tinted glass, the world belonged to me. I pressed my palm against the seat, steadying the trembling in my hands. This was my day, and I wanted to soak in every detail, every shimmer of light. When the car slowed before the venue, my breath caught. The hall was nothing short of magnificent. Columns lined the entrance, candles glowing in the evening light. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered golden fire across marble floors. Tables gleamed with silverware and roses, the kind of setting I had only seen in magazines, now unfolding around me. Boston's finest gathered here tonight. Professors from the university, businessmen in tailored suits, women dripping with jewels, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. And there I was, Isabella Monroe, a girl from a modest family, stepping into their world as though I belonged. I clutched my bouquet tighter, my knuckles whitening. I told myself I had earned this, not through money, not through name, but through love. Chris. At the end of the aisle, I saw him. His tuxedo was cut perfectly, shoulders broad, posture confident. He smiled at me, the same smile that had once made me lose my breath in a crowded cafeteria. I still remembered that day, the ridiculous way I had choked on a cookie, his amused grin as he told me to breathe. That was where it all began. My heart tightened with the memory, but I shook it away quickly. Today wasn't about the past. Today was about forever. The music swelled, and I stepped forward, each click of my heels echoing like a drumbeat. The guests turned, faces bright with admiration, whispers drifting like smoke. "She looks radiant. What a beautiful bride." For once, I wasn't the outsider, the plain girl shadowing others. I was the center, the bride walking toward a future she believed unshakable. When I reached Chris, he took my hand, warm and steady. His thumb brushed against my skin, grounding me. The officiant's voice rose, words of love and unity filling the air, but all I could hear was the rush of my own heartbeat. My secret pulsed inside me, and I almost blurted it then, in front of everyone. I wanted to shout, "We're going to be parents," but I held it in, waiting for the perfect moment. The vows passed in a blur, his voice promising devotion, mine trembling with emotion as I promised the same. Rings slid onto fingers, sealing us together. Applause thundered, champagne corks popped, and the music surged as we walked hand in hand into the reception hall. Everywhere, faces smiled, glasses lifted. My parents beamed, my friends cheered. Even Chris's father nodded in approval, though his mother's tight smile betrayed her disdain. I told myself it didn't matter. Nothing could touch us. Later, as we swirled across the dance floor for the first time as husband and wife, I thought, this is the moment. The orchestra played softly, the chandeliers casting halos of light, and Chris leaned in to whisper, "You're everything I ever wanted, Izzy." Tears pricked my eyes. My hand drifted toward my stomach, brushing against the silk of my gown. Soon, I thought. Soon, I'll tell him. The world felt golden that night. Every laugh, every toast layering itself into the memory I wanted to carry forever. My cheeks ached from smiling, my feet sore from dancing, but none of it mattered. For once, life had given me everything I had dared to dream of: love, acceptance, and the promise of more. I looked around the glittering hall, the clinking glasses, the sea of faces watching us with envy, and believed, truly believed, that nothing could break the spell. But fairy tales don't last, and mine was about to shatter. College had been a world I never quite believed I belonged to. Walking across the courtyard for the first time, I felt like a piece of driftwood washed ashore on a beach meant for polished stones. The other students seemed carved from a different material: daughters of senators, sons of CEOs, kids whose families appeared in glossy magazines. Their wardrobes whispered of luxury brands, their vacations were sprinkled across Europe, their conversations filled with references I couldn't follow. Me, I was just Isabella Munro from Worcester, the daughter of a machinist and a school secretary, clinging to a scholarship as though it were a life raft. I didn't have couture bags or summer homes. I had thrift store sweaters and a second-hand bike I locked nervously outside lecture halls. Most days I tried to stay invisible, hiding in the cafeteria's corners, reading while I ate. But invisibility betrayed me the afternoon I choked on a cookie. I had been alone at my usual table, flipping through notes, when a burst of laughter pulled my eyes toward a group of students striding past. At the center was a boy I had never seen before, though he seemed to command the entire room's attention. Blonde hair caught the sunlight, blue eyes bright with an energy that turned heads wherever he went. Christopher Hale. I didn't know his name yet, but I felt the gravitational pull of him instantly. And then, as though the universe wanted to humiliate me, a crumb of cookie caught in my throat. I gasped, coughed violently, my face burning as I tried to swallow and breathe at the same time. Chairs scraped as people turned, and just when I wanted the floor to open beneath me, he was there. He leaned over, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Breathe," he said lightly, as though amused rather than horrified. His hand patted my back, firm but not unkind. My mortification burned hotter than the choking itself. I managed to gulp water, my eyes streaming, and he gave me one last grin before returning to his group. I wanted to bury myself alive. The cafeteria incident became a memory I swore I'd lock away forever. It wasn't long after that Vanessa Blake entered my life. She was everything the campus admired: tall, elegant, with raven hair that shone under the lights and laughter that carried like music. People seemed to orbit around her and she let them. So when she stopped beside me in class one morning, tossing her designer scarf onto the desk and saying, "Mind if I sit here?" I thought she had made a mistake, but she sat, and the next day again, until somehow we were friends. She pulled me into her world of gallery openings and charity luncheons, of boutiques where the price tags made my stomach clench. I was always a little out of place, but Vanessa didn't seem to mind. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. Perhaps because standing next to me made her shine brighter, perhaps because I listened without competing. For a while, I convinced myself it was genuine. I thought I had found an anchor in a world that didn't quite accept me. Then came the lecture hall. It was one of those combined classes, overflowing with students. I had claimed a seat near the back when someone slid in beside me. My heart stuttered as I turned. It was him, the cookie boy, Christopher Hale. "Hey, cookie girl," he whispered with a grin. My cheeks flamed. I wanted to vanish, but something in his eyes held no malice, only amusement and recognition. I tried to laugh it off, mumbling, "Don't remind me." But he didn't stop there. He asked about the reading, joked about the professor's monotone, leaned in close as though my answers mattered. I couldn't understand it. Why me when he could have anyone? From that day, it became routine. Chris sought me out in lectures, walked with me after class, And little by little, the cafeteria embarrassment transformed into a private joke only we shared. He started showing up at the library during my late-night study sessions, sliding a coffee across the table with a lopsided smile. Figured you'd still be here. Those moments became threads, weaving a connection between us. He'd ask about my family, my dreams, and instead of laughing at my modest background, he seemed fascinated by it. In return, he told me about summers on Cape Cod, about sailing, about the weight of expectations from a family with a name that mattered in Boston. One evening, after hours bent over textbooks, he suggested coffee off campus. We sat across from each other at a tiny cafe, steam curling from our cups. Conversation flowed easily, laughter bridging the gap between our worlds. His gaze lingered longer than friendship allowed, and I felt something shift inside me, a dangerous warmth blooming. It was around then that Vanessa began to notice. She had always been watchful, but now her eyes followed Chris when he entered a room, sharp and assessing. She still called me her friend, still looped her arm through mine at parties, but her laughter when Chris spoke to me carried an edge. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things, that Vanessa wouldn't care. But there was no denying the tension, the way her smile faltered whenever his attention drifted my way. Still, I couldn't stop the current pulling me toward him. Our study sessions turned into dinners, our casual walks into long conversations under the glow of street lamps. Chris made me feel seen in a way I never had before. For once, I wasn't just Isabella from Worcester, the plain girl with second-hand clothes. With him, I was someone worth choosing. And though I didn't know it then, that choice, his choice, would change everything. Vanessa never circled a thing she wanted. She went straight for it. One afternoon, she stood in our dorm hallway, hip against the doorframe, eyes bright the way they got when she'd set her sights on a prize. "I think I'll go for him," she said, as casually as if she were choosing a pair of shoes. She didn't have to say his name. I felt the words land in my stomach like a stone. I tried to keep my voice even. "Chris and I have been spending time together." Her smile didn't falter, but something in it cooled. "Time is not the same as a commitment," she replied, and with a light laugh that sounded like glass, she added, "You don't mind, do you?" I told her I didn't know what I minded, which was true. I didn't know how to protect the fragile thing growing between Chris and me, or how to defend it without seeming ridiculous. In the end, I said, "We're all friends," and watched the corners of her mouth lift like I had given permission. A few days later, she suggested coffee. All three of us, just to hang out, and chose a cafe that matched her taste. High ceilings, murals no one could ignore. A menu full of single-origin promise. She arrived first and claimed the corner banquette, sliding in so the empty chair across from her belonged to me, the space at her side waiting for Chris. When he walked in and saw us, he smiled at me first, the kind of subtle tilt that travels more by instinct than intent. He took the seat beside Vanessa anyway, polite, aware of the optics. She placed a hand on his sleeve as if the spot had been reserved for her all along. The server came and went. Pastries appeared. The air smelled of citrus and burnt sugar. Vanessa did most of the talking. She told a story about a gallery opening that turned into a rooftop party, about a hedge fund manager, twice her age, who asked for her number, about a dress she planned to wear to a benefit where her father would present an award. Chris listened, nodding, but the way he glanced at me between her sentences, checking, inviting, made heat rise in my cheeks. When the conversation shifted toward classes, Vanessa waved a hand. "Boring. Tell us something fun. Izzy, what do you do when you're not studying?" I was about to answer when Chris leaned forward, elbow on the table. "She reads research papers for fun," he said, eyes on me, almost proud. "And she fixes her dad's broken toaster on weekends. She can take apart anything." His attention held like a steady beam of light. Vanessa's smile thinned. "Charming," she said. "Domestic goddess." She turned back to him, asking about a regatta on the Cape. He answered, but his voice softened when he asked me whether I'd finished the draft we'd discussed in the library. I told him I had, and he grinned. Knew you would. Something delicate cracked then, audible only to me. Vanessa's fingers left his sleeve. Her laugh came a fraction late. When the check arrived, Chris reached for it without thinking. Let me, he said. No, I protested, and he looked at me amused. You can get the next one. The next one. Vanessa watched that phrase float across the table and land between us. She wasn't used to anyone implying future plans that didn't center her. Outside, the afternoon had that cool Boston light that makes stone look like something you can bruise. We stepped onto the sidewalk, and Vanessa tightened her coat, turning so I had to meet her eyes. He's out of our league, Izzy, she said, the words gentle, almost intimate. Boys like Chris, they don't choose girls like us when it counts. For a second, I saw the girl I had first liked, the careful friend who warned, the older sister tone. But it wasn't a warning. It was a line drawn in expensive lipstick. I told her she was wrong. I said it calmly, not to convince her, but to hear how it sounded in the air. She gave a small shrug. We'll see then, and kissed my cheek without touching me at all. From that day on, the ground under our friendship tilted. She still sent texts about parties, still looped her arm through mine in crowded hallways, but there was a calculation under the charm, a flick of the eye measuring where Chris was whether he looked our way. He did often. Study sessions lengthened. Walks along the river became routine. In the library, he'd pull a chair close enough for our shoulders to touch, and when I explained a method I was wrestling with, he listened like the world had narrowed to the span of my hands. You make hard things feel obvious, he said once, like it was a private compliment he didn't give out lightly. Later, when he offered to carry my books because my bag looked like it might cut into my shoulder, I let him. We stopped one evening under a street lamp that made the air look poured out of gold. He reached for my hair as if to tuck it behind my ear, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand fall. I like you, he said, simple as that, as if it were weather, as if it were already true. I like you too, I answered, and the look on his face, relief, delight, certainty, told me a door had opened we would both walk through. Word moves across a campus without needing anyone to carry it. Vanessa didn't ask me anything directly. She didn't need to. She saw. The next time we were alone, she sat on my bed and crossed her legs at the ankle, a practiced grace. Just so I understand, she said, as if we were negotiating a contract. Are you too? I nodded. She stared a moment too long and then smiled in a way that did not touch her eyes. Then, I guess we're done competing. The sentence felt like a wrong note in a familiar song. I told her there was nothing to compete for. Of course there is, she said, rising, smoothing her skirt. There always is. The shift after that wasn't dramatic, it was precise. Invitations arrived later, or not at all. When we did go out, she introduced me as my friend Izzy with a softness that made the word friend sound temporary. At a party, she told a story about the time I almost failed a freshman lab because I was too earnest to cheat like the rest of us, and laughed first so others would know to laugh too. I smiled and let it pass. It wasn't new for me to be the foil that made her sparkle. The difference now was that she could see I didn't need her light anymore. One evening, Chris waited for me outside a seminar and reached for my hand without hesitation. We walked past a line of students, and I felt the look of us, their kind of world stitched to mine, seem visible and undeniable. Vanessa stood by the steps with two friends I barely knew. She watched our hands, then our faces, then lowered her eyes to her phone. When she glanced up, she was already smiling at someone over my shoulder, as if she had never been looking at us. Chris squeezed my fingers. You okay? He asked. I said I was. I meant it. But a small warning bell rang in a part of me that had learned to hear the things people don't say. Later, in the quiet of my room, I thought about her hallway pronouncement, he's out of our league, and realized how neatly it had placed us on the same side just long enough for her to step away clean. We had never been the same. She was the daughter of a man whose name opened doors. I was the daughter of people who knocked. But I had made a place for myself at a table where I hadn't been invited, and Chris had pulled out the chair without asking permission. That was the betrayal Vanessa could not forgive. Not that I had taken something of hers, but that I had accepted something she believed the world owed only to her. The night Chris told me he loved me, it wasn't fireworks. It was a low room, a late hour, a sentence spoken like a vow he had been practicing in his chest. We were sitting close, a book open and forgotten, and he said it with the same clarity he used when he solved something that had been troubling him. I said it back because it was already true. He smiled into the space between us as though it had been waiting to be filled with that exact word. Afterward, he walked me to my door and kissed my forehead, and the tenderness of that small gesture felt like a promise he intended to keep. I didn't see Vanessa again for a week. When I did, she was radiant with a kind of calm that didn't belong to her. "Congratulations," she said, as if she were blessing us. "I hope he is everything you think he is." The way she held my gaze, steady, dry, almost kind, made the hair on my arms rise. We were not fighting. We were not even warning each other anymore. We were choosing our positions. She left with a little wave, and when she turned the corner, I felt it like a temperature drop. Not an ending, but the quiet start of something calculated, a seed buried, watered not with tears but with patience. I didn't know what it would grow into. I only knew it had been planted. Meeting each other's families felt like the natural next step, but I underestimated just how different those meetings would be. When I first brought Chris to Worcester to meet my parents, everything felt warm and effortless. My mom cooked her best roast, though she apologized at least 3 times for the potatoes being a little overdone. My dad shook Chris's hand so firmly you'd think he was testing his strength, then laughed when Chris matched it with ease. The evening was simple. Beer glasses clinking, stories shared around the table, my dad asking about the Red Sox, while my mom teased me for never learning how to cook anything beyond pasta. Chris listened to them with genuine interest, and when he leaned in to compliment my mom's pie, she blushed like a girl. Later, when we were leaving, she hugged me and whispered, "He's wonderful, Izzy. You found a good one." That blessing wrapped around me like a quilt, soft and reassuring. For once, I felt like the pieces of my life, my modest upbringing, my ambitious education, my unexpected love could all fit together. But meeting Chris's family was like stepping into another universe. The Hale townhouse in Boston's Back Bay was immaculate, every detail curated for show. The foyer gleamed with polished wood, a grand staircase curling upward beneath a chandelier worth more than my parents' entire house. Oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the hall, watching as though they disapproved of anyone daring to enter. Chris's father greeted me politely enough, shaking my hand, asking about my studies, nodding with detached courtesy. But his mother, Margaret Hale, barely concealed her disdain. From the first glance, her smile was thin, her handshake perfunctory. Through dinner, she steered every conversation back to their family's achievements, the company they owned, the legacy they carried, the society events that defined their calendar. When I tried to talk about my parents or my own work, she cut me off with a raised brow and a swift change of subject. At one point, when Chris and his father stepped into the next room to fetch a bottle of wine, she leaned toward me across the table. Her voice was low, but the steel in it left no room for doubt. "You seem like a nice girl, Isabella, but let's be honest, you're not from our world. Christopher has responsibilities, expectations. This can't last." The words landed like a slap. My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. "With all due respect, ma'am, Chris loves me. That's what matters." Her eyes narrowed, a faint smile curling at the edges. "Love is a sentiment, not a foundation. You'll learn that soon enough." Chris returned before I could reply, his arm sliding protectively around my shoulders. He must have sensed the tension in the air because his jaw tightened as he looked between us. Later, when we were alone, I told him exactly what she'd said. His anger was immediate, sharp. She doesn't get to decide my life, he snapped, pacing across my apartment floor. Izzy, you're the one I want. You're the one I'm going to marry. I don't care what she thinks. He pulled me close, his eyes fierce. We'll build our own life. Just you and me. That's all that matters. And he meant it. I could feel the conviction in him, the defiance against his family's expectations. For the first time, I believed love really could stand against the weight of tradition and money. After graduation, we moved in together. Our apartment near Cambridge was small, with creaky floors and mismatched furniture we'd scavenged from thrift shops and hand-me-downs. The kitchen smelled faintly of spices from the tenants before us, and the radiators clanked loudly in winter. But to me, it was perfect. It was ours. We built routines like scaffolding around us. I cooked cheap pasta dinners while Chris worked late on projects for his internship. We curled up on the couch with books, sometimes reading aloud to each other. On weekends, we wandered the Charles River, holding hands, planning impossible futures. A house with a garden, vacations we couldn't afford, children with his blue eyes and my smile. Those days were golden, ordinary, and extraordinary all at once. I woke each morning to the warmth of his arm around me, to the quiet certainty that this was where I belonged. And then, one morning, I realized my body was telling me something new. I had missed a cycle. At first, I brushed it off as stress, but when the nausea hit, when the test strip showed those unmistakable lines, I sank to the bathroom floor and pressed a trembling hand against my stomach. Tears filled my eyes, not of fear, but of wonder. I was carrying our child. I wanted to tell him immediately, but another thought bloomed. What if I waited? What if I told him on our wedding day, the moment we promised forever? It would be the perfect gift, a secret I had nurtured in silence, revealed at the height of our joy. So I kept it close, guarding it like treasure. I went to quiet appointments at the clinic, tucking ultrasound photos deep into my journal. I started taking vitamins, slipping them into my bag where he wouldn't notice. Every time I looked at him, every time I felt his hand in mine, I wanted to shout the truth. But I held it back, savoring the anticipation of the moment to come. We were happy then, blissfully, naively happy. Our love felt unshakable. Our future so bright it seemed no shadow could ever fall across it. I thought we had built something that nothing and no one could touch. I couldn't have known how wrong I was. Vanessa reappeared the way a storm does. Quiet sky, gentle breeze, then a pressure you can feel in your bones. She texted first. Can we talk? I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering, the memory of her cool smile and careful silences flickering in my mind. Chris noticed my frown and asked what was wrong. I showed him the screen. She wants to make amends, I said, trying to sound neutral. He read the text and exhaled. Maybe she means it. People grow up. If it gives you peace, you should hear her out. You loved her once. I did. Or I loved who I thought she was. I wanted to believe in second chances, in old friendships finding new footing. After everything Chris and I had built, I felt untouchable, buffered by joy. Okay, I said at last. I'll meet her. Vanessa chose the cafe and arrived 10 minutes early, as if to stage the scene. She hugged me with a softness that felt practiced, then pulled back to study my face. You look happy, she said, voice low. I'm glad. I've been awful. Jealous. Petty. I'm sorry. Hearing the words I'd once needed made something loosen inside me. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. We talked for a while about nothing, classes, work, the weather that couldn't decide between winter and spring. Then she touched my wrist lightly, the way she used to before delivering a dare. Let me throw you a tiny bachelorette night. Nothing wild. Just us, my apology, and a celebration rolled into one. Please. I hesitated. She saw it and went perfectly still. No pressure, Izzy. I understand if you'd rather not. When I told Chris later, he paused, then nodded. If it's small and you're comfortable. Maybe it's a good moment to close the book on all the old mess. I'll pick you up whenever you want. I wanted to believe this could be simple. All right, I said. One night, we met downtown under a wash of neon and the thump of bass leaking into the street. Vanessa looked radiant, as always, black dress, an easy smile, the kind of confidence that makes people step aside without realizing they have. She hugged me again. No drama, she promised. Just a toast, some dancing, and I'll have you home by midnight. Inside, the club was all mirrors and light. The DJ's beat made the floor pulse. Bodies moved like a tide. Vanessa guided me to a high table near the bar as if she'd reserved the exact square foot of space we needed. I've taken care of everything, she said, flashing a grin over my shoulder at the bartender. Non-alcoholic for the bride. I remember. He set down 2 pretty drinks, jewel-toned and sweating, each with a twist of citrus perched on the rim. I lifted mine and sniffed. It smelled like summer. No alcohol? I asked because the air inside me was suddenly cautious. 0, she said brightly. You think I'd mess with your big day? She clinked her glass against mine. To forgiveness. I sipped. It was sweet, clean, harmless. It's good, I said. Good, she echoed, watching me. It struck me, only later, how closely. We found a rhythm then. Talk, sip, laugh, dance. She kept the conversation light, slipping compliments between jokes, the way she had when we were new friends, and she'd wanted me to relax into her orbit. I let myself flow with it, the way you sink into a warm bath. The music was too loud for heavy conversations. My feet found the beat. My body remembered joy. But after a while, the edges of everything softened. The lights blurred just a touch. I thought maybe I needed water, or maybe I just needed to sit. But when I reached for the table, my fingers felt a fraction off from where I intended them to land. Vanessa noticed and placed a cool hand at the center of my back. Breathe, she murmured, the same word Chris had once used when I was choking in the cafeteria. Only this time it sounded like instruction, not comfort. I'm fine, I said, except the room had a slow tilt that didn't belong to the DJ. I blinked hard, and the tilt didn't correct. The second drink waited, sweating prettily. Maybe I should. Let's get some air, she said, her smile unwavering. She slid the second glass toward me with a fingertip. One more sip, then we'll step outside. I took it because my hands moved when asked, because my trust remembered what my reason had started to forget. The sweetness hit my tongue. The floor rose an inch. I set the glass down carefully, as if it were precious and fragile. The next minutes came in slow frames. Vanessa's hand on my elbow, a corridor of blue light, the door to the street opening like a mouth. Cool air, sudden and bright. I tried to say I needed Chris, that I should text him, that I didn't feel right. My phone stayed in my bag, heavy as a stone. Vanessa's voice, close to my ear, I've got you. The city peeled away in smears of headlights. A car door, the soft thunk of it closing. My cheek against leather that smelled expensive. Vanessa's perfume, something dark and sweet, blooming in the smallness of the space. I watched the city stutter past and then fold in on itself. When I woke, the light was wrong. Not the club's neon or the city's street lamps, but a cool, quiet brightness. I blinked up at a ceiling I didn't recognize. The sheets under my palms were smooth in a way that said money. My dress was gone, folded neatly on the back of a chair. Someone had tied me into a silk robe that wasn't mine. My mouth tasted like metal and sugar. Finally, Vanessa said softly from the doorway. She carried a glass of water like a prop. You were out. I pushed myself upright, the room yawning before it steadied. What happened? You overdid it, she said, sympathetic and scolding at once. Bride, adrenaline. It happens. You were not yourself. I didn't drink, I said. My voice was a rasp. You promised. She lifted a hand, palm out. Reassuring. Sober cocktails, yes. But you know how your body is. One sip and you're gone. She set the glass on the nightstand and smoothed the blanket maternal. I got you out of there before you did something you regret. You were affectionate with people. My stomach flipped. What people? Relax, she said quickly, lightly. No one who matters. She tilted her head, studying me with the patience of a clinician. You don't remember? I searched my mind and found only smudges. A beat, a corridor, cold air. No, then let's keep it that way. She smiled, conspiratorial now. No harm, no foul. I called you a car. Sleep it off. Tomorrow you'll laugh. But nothing about my body felt like laughter. A tremor started in my hands that I hid by clenching my fingers in the blanket. I need to go home, I said. Of course, she agreed easily. I'll have someone bring your dress. Freshen up first. You look fragile. She left me alone with the water and the too soft quiet of her guest room. I stood slowly, the robe slipping against my skin, and stared at my dress folded with surgical care. On the vanity, a compact sat open, powder dusting its mirror in a pale fog. Next to it lay a packet of makeup wipes, one used and ghosted with my lipstick's color. I touched my mouth. The shades still clung there faintly, proof of a night I didn't own. In the bathroom, I held the edge of the sink until the world shrank back to the size of tile and mirror. My reflection looked like someone who had been gently erased at the edges. I rinsed my face with cool water and whispered to the girl in the mirror, You didn't drink. The girl tried to believe me. Vanessa's car dropped me at my building just before dawn. She kissed my cheek lightly, clean, friendly, as if we'd shared a harmless adventure. Rest, she said. Big day soon. Inside, I slid down the door and sat on the floor. Dress pooled like a white sea around me. I pressed a hand to my stomach and waited for the baby's quiet reminder that I was still anchored to something true. It came a small hush of reassurance, and I breathed. I told myself to move on, to call it a bad night, to accept Vanessa's version because it was easier than prying at the blankness. But as I drifted toward sleep, a thought pricked through the fog. The way she'd watched me over the rim of her glass, the way the second drink had arrived without me asking, the way she'd guided me through the club as if she'd rehearsed the path. I pushed the thought away. I chose trust because suspicion would have torn me open. I didn't know, not then, how that night would be used, how grainy frames and carefully staged angles could turn absence into accusation. I didn't know the name that would later attach itself to the man in those images. I only knew that a door had been opened without my consent, and on the other side someone waited with a camera and a story already written. I slept hard and dreamless, while somewhere plans clicked into place. The morning of my wedding dawned with sunlight pouring across Boston like liquid gold. I woke believing it would be the happiest day of my life, the day all of the fear and doubt finally dissolved. I had carried my secret close to my heart for weeks. Our baby, the future growing inside me, and I couldn't wait to share it with Chris. I had rehearsed the reveal so many times, slipping the ultrasound photo into his palm during our first dance, whispering it against his ear while the world applauded us. That moment would make our vows even more sacred. The limousine carried me down Commonwealth Avenue, its polished windows reflecting the towering brownstones and fluttering flags. I adjusted the veil that framed my face, heart drumming with anticipation. Outside, Boston moved as usual, horns honking, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks, but inside, time slowed. This was my day, and I wanted to drink in every detail. The venue gleamed like something out of a dream. Chandeliers spilled light across marble floors. Tall arrangements of white roses lined the aisle, and strings played softly as guests arrived in silk dresses and tailored suits. Boston's high society gathered here. Professors, politicians, business magnates. I caught sight of my parents near the front, my mother dabbing her eyes, my father sitting stiff and proud in his one good suit. Then the doors opened, and I stepped forward. My gown rippled behind me, lace whispering across the floor. All I saw was Chris, waiting at the end of the aisle in his tuxedo, his blue eyes fixed on me with an expression that stole my breath. The ceremony unfolded in a blur. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, applause rising like thunder. Every time he squeezed my hand, I felt sure nothing could touch us. The reception roared with joy, music swelling, glasses clinking, guests toasting to love and forever. I floated through it all, laughing, hugging, believing we were untouchable. During our first dance, Chris whispered, "You're everything I ever wanted, Izzy." I pressed my hand against my stomach and smiled, thinking, "I'm more than you know." Then the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bridal party has prepared a special presentation." His cheerful tone rang across the hall as the lights dimmed. A large screen lowered at the front of the room. I blinked in confusion. I hadn't planned anything like this. Chris looked at me, puzzled, but before either of us could speak, the video began. At first it was static, grainy shapes. Then the image sharpened, and my blood turned to ice. It was me, my face, my body, in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. I was sprawled across sheets, hair tangled, eyes closed. Beside me was Max, Vanessa's friend, someone I barely knew. The camera angle, the shadows, all designed to suggest the worst. A gasp rippled through the hall. Voices whispered. Chairs scraped as guests craned to see. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color. Chris's parents stared in horror, his mother clutching her pearls as if they could shield her. I stumbled forward, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. This isn't what it looks like." My voice cracked, but no one moved to help. The footage looped, every frame twisting the knife deeper. The shame was unbearable, a hot wave flooding my skin. I looked at Chris, desperate for him to see the truth in my eyes. But his face was stone, pale and rigid, jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. His mother's voice cut through the silence, sharp as glass. "I warned you, Christopher. She was never one of us. And now she disgraces you in front of everyone." I turned, searching for Vanessa, and found her near the front, her hand pressed to her lips, her eyes wide with feigned anguish. "Izzy, how could you?" she whispered loudly enough for others to hear, shaking her head like a friend betrayed. "No," I cried, my voice echoing off the marble. "It's not true. Chris, you know me, you know I would never." But he stepped back away from me. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. His eyes, once filled with tenderness, now burned with fury. "You made a fool of me," he said, his voice breaking, in front of everyone. Tears blurred my vision. "Please listen to me." Before I could finish, he yanked the ring from his finger. With a sharp flick, he hurled it to the floor. The metallic clang echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Gasps erupted, followed by the deafening hum of scandal. "I can't do this," Chris spat. "It's over." The room spun. Faces turned toward me, whispering, judging, condemning. My lungs seized. I couldn't catch a breath. My world, our world, collapsed in front of hundreds of witnesses. I turned and ran. My heels slipped on the marble as I fled the hall, hands clutching my gown. Guests called my name, but I shoved past them, blinded by tears. I burst through the doors into the night, the cool Boston air slapping my face. The cobblestones tore at the hem of my dress, ripping lace into ribbons. I stumbled, shoes twisting until one heel snapped. I kicked them off, my bare feet slapping the pavement as I sprinted into the darkness. The city lights blurred into streaks, horns blaring as I crossed streets without looking. My chest burned, my veil tangled in my hair, my gown dragging like a shroud. Somewhere behind me, music still played, laughter still rang, but I was gone. I ran until my lungs screamed, until the lace shredded completely, until I was nothing more than a broken bride in tatters, barefoot and lost in the Boston night. I don't remember how long I ran that night. My legs carried me as though flight could erase shame, as though bare feet on cold pavement could somehow undo what had been done to me. By the time I collapsed onto a bench in Boston Common, the wedding dress was nothing but tatters, lace hanging in shreds, satin blackened by dirt and city grime. My chest heaved, and sobs tore out of me so violently I startled a pair of pigeons from the branches overhead. I curled forward, pressing both hands against my stomach. The secret I had guarded so carefully, the child I hadn't yet told Chris about, felt heavier than ever. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, rocking slightly. "I wanted to give you a family. I wanted us to belong." Tears blurred the park lights until the world turned liquid. My heart throbbed with humiliation, betrayal, and a strange, dangerous thought. Maybe it would be easier to just stop. Stop running. Stop hurting. Stop existing. The night air was damp, sharp with the smell of wet leaves. Around me, Boston kept breathing. Cars passing, laughter from students cutting across the park, the steady hum of a city that didn't notice a bride unraveling in its heart. I wanted to disappear into that indifference. Then a sound broke through my fog, a low groan, jagged and urgent. My head snapped up. A few yards away, under the shadow of an elm, an older man slumped sideways on a bench. One hand clawed at his chest, his face ashen in the dim light. For a heartbeat, I froze. Then instinct overtook despair. I stumbled to my feet, nearly tripping over the ragged hem of my gown, and rushed toward him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. His lips moved, but only a strangled sound escaped. I dropped to my knees, fumbling for my phone with trembling hands. I dialed 911, voice shaking as I gave the dispatcher our location. 70-year-old man, chest pain, difficulty breathing, please hurry. The operator's calm voice guided me. "Keep him comfortable. Does he have nitroglycerin?" "Sir, do you have medication?" I asked, leaning close. He whispered something faint. "Jacket, pocket." I reached carefully, finding a small brown vial. My fingers shook so badly I nearly dropped it, but I managed to slip one tablet under his tongue. "There," I murmured, steadying his hand with mine. "Hold on. Help is coming." Then I remembered the bottle of aspirin I always carried in my purse. I pressed one into his palm, coaxing, "Chew this, please." He obeyed weakly, the tablet crunching between shallow breaths. Minutes dragged like hours. I crouched beside him, listening to the ragged pull of his lungs, murmuring words I barely heard myself say. "Stay with me. You're not alone. I've got you." My wedding veil slipped forward, brushing his arm, absurdly delicate against his frailty. At last, the wail of sirens split the night. Red and blue lights washed over the trees as paramedics rushed toward us. They lifted him gently, voices brisk but calm, attaching monitors and lines with practiced speed. I backed away, dress torn, hair wild, my bare feet sinking into damp grass. One of the EMTs paused as they loaded him into the ambulance. She glanced at me, at the ruined gown and the streaks of mascara down my cheeks. "You did good," she said firmly. "You probably saved his life." Her words stunned me. Me, the bride who had been humiliated, abandoned, cast out in front of everyone. Me, the woman who had thought of giving up only minutes earlier. And yet, in the space of a single heartbeat, I had become someone else. The reason this man might live to see tomorrow. As they closed the ambulance doors, his eyes flickered open. For a brief second, they locked onto mine with startling clarity. His lips curved in the faintest smile. "Thank you," he whispered, the syllables barely audible over the engine's rumble. Then the doors sealed and he was gone. I stood there in the glow of the departing lights, shivering in the night air. My hand still trembled, but a strange calm washed over me. I had failed in so many ways that evening. I had been betrayed, destroyed in front of everyone I knew. And yet here, in the silence of the park, I had done something that mattered. The contrast was almost unbearable. One world that had spat me out like nothing, and another where my presence meant life or death. I sank back onto the bench, torn gown pooling around me, and let the realization settle. I wasn't finished. My story wasn't over. At that moment, I didn't know who he was. To me, he was simply a stranger whose life had collided with mine in the darkest hour. But later, I would learn his name, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, and he would become the turning point of everything that followed. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender soap when I walked through its wide glass doors the morning after the wedding disaster. My gown had been replaced by borrowed clothes from my mother, loose jeans, an oversized sweater, but I still felt marked, as though everyone could see the ashes of humiliation clinging to me. I hadn't expected to return so soon, not as a patient, but as a visitor, answering the call of the man whose life I had stumbled across in the park. The nurse at the desk smiled. "He's been asking for you since dawn. Room 304. When I stepped inside, the old man from the bench no longer looked frail. His color had returned, and his eyes, though tired, were sharp. He lifted a hand. "Isabella, isn't it?" I nodded. "How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you," he said. "Not many would have stopped. You did." He studied me carefully. "But you look like someone who's just had her world broken in two." I sat down heavily in the chair beside his bed. Maybe it was the gentleness in his tone. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had hollowed me out. But the words spilled from me. I told him everything: the wedding, the video, the betrayal, the child Chris didn't know about. My voice cracked and faltered, but he didn't interrupt. He listened like every syllable mattered. When I finally fell silent, he took a deep breath. "I am Jonathan Whitmore," he said. "Once a physician, later a philanthropist. I've built things, lost things, and at my age, I can tell when someone is standing at a crossroads." He leaned closer, his gaze steady. "You saved my life. Allow me to help rebuild yours." At first, I shook my head. "I can't accept." "Listen to me," he interrupted, firm but kind. "You are carrying a child. You are brilliant, and you are alone when you should not be. Let me stand where others have failed." Something inside me cracked open at those words. No judgment, no suspicion, only belief. Within a week, Jonathan had arranged appointments for me at one of Boston's best hospitals. Specialists guided me through every step of my pregnancy. Each time I saw the ultrasound, tiny feet, a flickering heartbeat, I felt less like a discarded bride and more like a mother with a purpose. Jonathan came to visits when he could, sitting quietly in the corner, smiling when the doctor pronounced everything healthy. He didn't stop at my health. When I confessed how much I had loved research, how I feared losing that part of myself, he nodded thoughtfully. "Then you won't. I'll fund your work. You'll finish your degree, pursue your ideas. The world needs people like you." I protested again, but he waved me off. "Consider it repayment. You gave me life. Let me give you the chance to live yours fully." So I worked. Through the nausea, through the endless nights of rocking a newborn, through exhaustion so deep it made my bones ache, I worked. I poured myself into experiments, data, papers that began to gather recognition. My daughter, tiny and fierce, grew alongside my research. Her first steps came the same week I submitted my first paper for publication. Her first word, "Mama," echoed through our apartment as I drafted a proposal Jonathan had encouraged me to send to a national grant foundation. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table, head in my hands, wondering how I could keep going. But Jonathan was always there, steady as a lighthouse. He babysat so I could rest, cooked when I forgot to eat, reminded me that healing wasn't a single act, but 1,000 small ones strung together. He loved my daughter as if she were his granddaughter, and she adored him, her tiny fingers tugging at his sleeve, her laughter filling the quiet of his townhouse when we visited. Years passed in a rhythm of discovery and motherhood. I learned to braid hair while memorizing presentation notes, to pack lunches while running statistical analyses. Every day stitched me closer together, replacing shame with pride. The culmination came with an invitation to present my research at an international conference in Rome. I remember standing backstage, my daughter in the audience beside Jonathan, her legs swinging impatiently, his hand steady on her shoulder. My palms were damp, my throat tight, but I looked out at the sea of faces and felt something shift. When I stepped onto the stage, the lights blinded me at first. But then the words came, clear and confident. I spoke of data, of discovery, of the possibilities my work opened. I spoke of persistence, of finding patterns where others saw chaos. Each sentence felt like a reclamation, proof that I was more than a scandal, more than a ruined bride. The applause at the end thundered through the hall, rising to the vaulted ceiling. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. In that moment, I wasn't defined by betrayal, but by achievement. I wasn't a victim. I was a mother, a scientist, a woman who had clawed her way back to the light. When I walked off stage, my daughter barreled into my arms, her laughter bubbling with pride. Jonathan stood behind her, his eyes bright with tears. "You've done it, Isabella," he whispered. "You've built a new life, and it's only the beginning." Rome gleamed like a painting the evening I stepped out of the conference hall. The sun dipped low, gilding the domes and cobblestones in warm amber. My daughter skipped ahead, curls bouncing, her laughter echoing through the piazza. Jonathan walked slowly behind us, leaning on his cane, his expression a mix of pride and contentment. I had just delivered the most important presentation of my career, and the applause still hummed in my ears. For the first time in years, I felt wholly myself, mother, scientist, woman, survivor. I was still glowing with that feeling when I heard a voice I hadn't expected ever to hear again. "Izzy." The sound of my old nickname froze me in place. I turned slowly, and there he was, Christopher Hale. At first, I barely recognized him. The man who once stood at the center of every room, polished and untouchable, now looked hollowed out. His suit hung loose on a frame that had lost its strength, his hair thinned, his face drawn and tired. The confident posture I remembered had collapsed into something uncertain. His eyes, those blue eyes that once made my heart race, were bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion. For a moment, time folded. I was back in the Boston cafe, choking on a cookie, meeting his amused gaze for the first time. Back in the lecture hall, whispering secrets between notes. Back at the altar, his hand crushing mine before he threw me away in front of everyone. 1,000 memories collided, but they no longer cut like glass. "Chris," I said, my voice calm, almost distant. He stepped closer, desperation flickering in his expression. "It's really you. God, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." His voice cracked, and the rawness of it startled me. I didn't move. I simply waited. Words tumbled out of him in a rush. "Izzy, I'm sorry. For everything. For not believing you. For humiliating you. He broke off, his hands trembling at his sides. "I was blind. Vanessa lied. She twisted everything. I see it now. And I've paid for it. Believe me, I've paid." His confession spilled into the evening air, but instead of triumph, I felt only quiet. The rage I once carried was gone, replaced by something softer, almost pity. "I lost everything," he continued. "The company, my family's respect. Vanessa used me, then left. I drink too much now, I can't sleep. I thought of you every day, wishing I could undo it all." His voice dropped. "I know it's too late, but please let me at least meet her. Our daughter." At that, my chest tightened. My little girl was only a few feet away, her laughter rising as Jonathan handed her a cone of pistachio gelato. She looked so carefree, so untouched by the shadows of the past. I turned back to Chris. "She's not our daughter," I said evenly. "You forfeited that when you chose to believe lies instead of me. She's mine, and she's thriving, surrounded by love." He flinched, the words landing hard. Izzy, please. I just want a chance. A glimpse. I studied him. This broken man bore little resemblance to the boy who once held my heart. His arrogance was gone, stripped bare by regret. But regret doesn't rebuild what's been destroyed. I don't hate you, Chris, I said softly. Not anymore. But there's no place for you in our lives. You made your choice, and it cost you everything. That's not my burden to carry. His eyes filled with tears, spilling down his cheeks. For years I had imagined this moment, thought I would savor his downfall, feed off the justice of it. But now, standing in Rome with my child's laughter in the background and Jonathan's steady presence beside us, I understood something deeper. Sweet revenge wasn't watching him suffer. It wasn't proving my innocence to him. It was this, my life rebuilt, stronger than before. My daughter's smile, my career flourishing, the family I had found, the love that had chosen me. That was victory. I reached out, touched his arm lightly, a gesture of farewell more than forgiveness. I hope you find peace someday. Then I turned and walked away. My daughter ran toward me, gelato dripping down her fingers, and I bent to wipe her chin, laughing softly. Jonathan caught my eye, his gaze full of quiet